So we are live, and it's a very, very big day, everybody, because it is book launch day for Mikhail. It's right behind me. It's right behind him. The Dark Side of the Earth. Russia's thank you short-lived victory over totalitarianism. So much to ask you about this. I'm still reading it, and I want everyone to know that it's a very big title, but it's really fascinating, Mikhail. But you must have interviewed so many people, because it's a book about people, and there are all these different intersecting threads in it, right? I mean, it's the Gorbachevs, Raisa and Mikhail Gorbachev. It's Solzhenitsyn. It's Sakharov. It's the woman we've talked about, Alla Pukacheva, the pop star. Isn't we've done an interview on her. Gary Kasparov, many different people, and it's and your own story and your own family story is interwoven. And I almost feel, and I haven't finished it yet, but I feel like you through all these different people's stories and showing how they all interconnect, you tell the story of the collapse of the Soviet Union in a way that feels maybe deliberately, there's a chaos, and then so it's in a way not that surprising that out of that chaos, I mean, we know what emerges, right? Is Putin's Russia. But take it away. What was your premise when you began this? Or did you start off by interviewing all these people and then thought, here's the story I've got? I mean, how did it come about?
I was writing this book for collecting all of these interviews, then writing this book. For altogether, it was more than 6 years. I conducted more than 200 interviews. So it was really very long and very exciting journey for me. But in the beginning, I knew that I needed to write a new story of the collapse of Soviet Union, because it seemed like we read a lot of books. There are a lot of amazing books written about this topic, starting from David Remnick's Lenin's Tomb to a lot of William Taubman, who else? Vladislav Zubok, a lot of amazing books written about that. But to my mind, it's still worthy to write another one, because now we kind of know the end of the story. Because many years ago, it seemed like we knew how Soviet Union collapsed. And many years ago, 35 years ago, we had the happy ending. It looked like Soviet Union peacefully collapsed. It looked like the West and the liberal democracy, the West, the United States won the Cold War. The liberal democracy prevailed. Good guys defeated bad guys, including in Russia. And that was the preliminary result of that part of history. And we know that we remember that Francis Fukuyama called it end of history. And we used to live in that world where the history was over, at least that history was over forever. But now we know that it was not. Now we have another act in that history, and all the results are completely different. We see that the West probably it's questionable if it won the Cold War. It's definitely questionable if the Cold War was over or not, because what we have now, yes, is it still Cold War? It's very questionable issue if Soviet Union finally collapsed. What what's up with Russian imperialism? What's up with Putin's Russia? Is it still and the invasion of Ukraine? Is it another act of the Soviet collapse, but not that bloodless that we used to witness in the '80s, in the beginning of the '90s? So yeah, Gorbachev was a decent person, and he didn't want any blood on his hands. But now we will have different leader of Russia and completely different continuation of that story. So and if we look at it from the Russian perspective, we see that all those people who were considered to be terrible, um, communists, nationalists, people who adored dictatorship, people who wanted Russia to be empire, who wanted to sacrifice as many lives as possible for the sake of Russian imperial greatness, they are in power. They have prevailed. So the terrible reactionary coup of 1991 of August 1991, which seems so pathetic and seemed so ridiculous and was clearly defeated by Russian people who wanted democracy. And now we see that those plotters, those Soviet bureaucrats, they are the heroes of Russia today. They were celebrated, they were awarded by orders and medals by Vladimir Putin. So we have completely overturned results
Right.
of the Cold War. So that was my initial reason to start writing this this book about the end of the Cold War. Um, are still with me? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well,
and I,
so,
and I,
and I,
and
yeah,
I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure that I'm following all the right people. I didn't want to be focused only on Yeltsin and Gorbachev because they are usually considered to be the most important characters of that story. Gorbachev, Reagan, Gorbachev, George Bush Sr., and Yeltsin. So those people kind of uh, finalized that chapter in the global history. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's right choice to follow only these lines and to ignore the broader picture. So I was deliberately trying to make a broader picture to look
yeah.
at this story not only from Moscow, not only from the Kremlin, but from different parts of the Soviet Union, from different perspectives.
Well, it's so interesting because you have a Nobel Prize winning physicist. You have the great, one of the greatest Russian contemporary writer arguably of the last, well, yeah, I mean, last 50, 100 years. You have most famous domestic singer.
I would say that
And you have Casper, and you have Gary
sorry
Kasparov.
for interrupt. Yes, sorry for interrupting, but it's 100% right that you are mostly highlighting these two because Sakharov and Solzhenitsyn, two Nobel Prize winners, they symbolize basically the two most important movements in Russian society and actually in the world. Sakharov is the symbol of, he is the prophet of liberal democracy. He is the person who strongly believed that Russia is not an exceptional nation, that Russia deserves to be democracy and will be democracy. He is he's some kind of Soviet Oppenheimer. He is
Yeah.
the person who invented hydrogen bomb and then was terrified by his creature and started his amazing dissident fight. And Solzhenitsyn is a figure of very different nature. He wrote Gulag Archipelago, so he started as the fighter against Soviet dictatorship, fighter against Stalinism and against Soviet Union. But in the end, he turns out to be the leader of right nationalism. And we know now that in the United States today, Solzhenitsyn is the hero of New Right. He's widely celebrated as the fierce critic of liberalism. He, in his later books and especially articles, he was after he moved from the USSR to the state of Vermont in the US. He was probably the most well-known enemy of liberal democracy. He was writing that democracy is weak, democracy is chaos, democracy um, cannot help, cannot create the real leader. And real strong leader is something that is needed for the for the good West to fight with all the evil forces. So basically, he would be. We know that if Solzhenitsyn was alive right now, he would adore Donald Trump and his um, anti-woke agenda, because Solzhenitsyn was the first anti-woke writer in the world. He was writing a lot about degenerative Western culture, and so yeah, it's
it is. It's. I mean, it's shambles. Which is, which you know, it's you can't categorize this into a neat box. I mean, and people are complicated and people are full of contradictions. I mean, I think you're right that even your own family members, right, are full of contradictory, feelings. I mean, would that be a fair representation?
yeah, absolutely. And it's for the first time ever. I think it's fair to say that it's my seventh book, and fourth book published in English. And for the first time, I dare to start writing about myself, about mostly about my family, um, because as a person, I was shaped by the collapse of Soviet Union. It's a very important personal story, and the philosophically, morally, I was created by those. I was only 10 when Soviet Union collapsed. Um, but I was following all the events. I was reading all the Perestroika era media, and definitely I was watching my parents, my grandmother, suffering or just witnessing what was happening. So for them, Soviet Union was the place where they were born. They were shaped by Soviet values, by Soviet. My mother hated Soviet hypocrisy. Uh, my grandmother um, hated communists, and it was like she was amazing, very ardent fighter against all injustice. And for her, although she was very patriotic, but she hated communists because she blamed them for being very unjust and for not being um, true caring leaders and true um but it's funny that with the same passion she started hating all the Democrats when Democrats prevailed, and she started criticizing, hating them for being not enough democratic, because she wanted them to be more democratic and more fair and more just. So yeah, my family was the battlefield of this um, internal Cold War, um, and the for me, even in this book, the divorce of my parents is in a way the metaphor of the collapse of Soviet Union, because I was not the my father was he served in the military, in military intelligence, and he is a very, especially when he was younger, he was very, I would say, tough guy. So I was not probably the happiest child, and for me, the divorce of my parents was kind of liberation from that. Um, call it domestic violence. Uh, but at least that's what I felt, and it was kind of a way of liberation. Um, I don't focus a lot on myself and my family
No.
story. But every chapter I start with a short page or something like that of a sketch about the
Yeah.
characters from my family.
And then and I want to ask you about who you obviously interviewed a lot of people many, many times. I could see a bit in the footnotes. But I mean, the way you lay this out isn't with some grand sort of um, philosophical argument. I mean, you literally thread the stories of all these people together. I mean, at the risk of sort of, I mean, that it feels like a bit like Tolstoy. You go from the fields with the peasants into the ballrooms, and it's not entirely dissimilar. At some point we follow Milos Forman, right, the movie director, and and so you sort of see how all these stories connect. And so, I mean, who who I mean, tell us about the actual interviews. I mean, I found as I was reading it, I wanted to be in the room when you were doing some of these interviews, because there's a lot of detail in there about, when Gorbachev was going from A to B, the story. I mean, you clearly must have interviewed someone close to them, or and his wife.
I met
Yeah,
Gorbachev many times. Yeah,
right.
Gorbachev was amazing person. He died 3 years ago. I met him many times before that. Uh, he was a very interesting person, and all the interviews were it was always a challenge. And I'll tell you why. Because that's a very remarkable example of a person who recreated his own memories.
Ah,
Um, it was so, yeah, definitely the collapse of Soviet Union and his fall from the power was such a trauma for him. So he had rewritten his memories to forget completely that there was the moment when he was Soviet dictator. In his memories, he has always been a freedom fighter. So it was not his fault. It was by design. It was the collapse of Soviet Union and triumph of democracy was in his memories his achievement. Oh, yeah, he blamed Yeltsin a lot. He blamed other people for also blamed himself, but he preferred not to remember about few pages which are not which contradict this theory that he was always trying to be good. And for example, the striking moment was when I was trying to interview him, to talk to him about Ceausescu and the deposed dictator of Romania, who was executed in December 1989. And when I was trying to ask Gorbachev, for example, what what were you thinking that moment when you learned of Ceausescu's death? Did you think I'm the next one? Because that moment was a really hard moment for Gorbachev. He was still Soviet dictator. He was supposed to help Ceausescu. He was, and by all those participants of pro-democracy protest rallies in the Soviet Union, they were demanding Gorbachev to be deposed, and they were comparing him to Ceausescu. Um, and Gorbachev, he was shocked by the question because he erased that part from his memory, and it was a very important lesson for me, um, how I should deal with it's actually that's the task of my life. I'm interviewing people for many years, and I'm trying to get some information not only from not only from the conversation with them, but also from their silence. And I have to detect, as any journalist, I have to detect whether they lie, if it's a sincere lie, or if they lie, if they're trying to deceive me deliberately. So yeah, it's all very meaningful. Definitely, I should be very well prepared. I should know their life minute by minute, and only after that I should start asking questions. But Gorbachev was amazing person. Um, Probably the most important phrase I've heard from him was that he has always known that if his hands had been covered with blood, his wife would have never lay in bed with him. And
Mm.
that was the most important thing for him. He loved his wife Raisa so much, and she was such a moral authority for him. She was a philosopher.
Mhm.
She graduated from School of Philosophy of Moscow State University, and she was a very well educated woman, very liberated woman, and she was a person of values. And for her, it was very important. And he knew that she was not joking, that she really cared about um, moral values, about human rights, and he could not allow himself to be Soviet, to be real dictator, because that would have been too much for Raisa. And I think the moral role of Raisa Gorbachova is really underestimated. And in all of my books, I'm all the times very careful about those untold stories and
Mm.
unseen, unnoticed reasons why people really made all those decisions. What was um, the real reason? Who was the real um, initiator of that mistake or that uh, accidental solution? For example, I was very was excited when I learned that basically the coup of August of 1991 flopped because of the wife of Soviet Minister of Defense, and she was uh, also a woman of democratic values, and she came to the headquarters of Soviet Ministry of Defense, and she was crying for 3 days in a row, demanding from his husband to withdraw troops from Moscow. And she demanded him to call Gorbachev to come back to his senses, to think about his responsibility, that he cannot be the executioner, he cannot be tyrant, he cannot be a traitor to his people. And she was begging him mm, to stop it, to stop the coup. And he gave up. He
Yeah.
decided that he decided that his wife was actually right. So, or
Well,
we,
you're right. I mean, the theme of marriage and relationships and the important role they play. I mean, with Solzhenitsyn, with Sakharov and his wife. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot going on.
yes, yes, yeah.
People's relationships, people's marriages determine
The
the
era,
course of history.
the era of powerful women. That's true.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So tell me. I mean, obviously, it seems you know Kasparov well. Um, who? I mean, what were the other sort of interviews you did that where you really learned something you didn't know?
It was very interesting. I won't throw a lot of names because a lot of our viewers probably will be confused by all those Slavic and non-Slavic names. Uh, I really first I would tell you that I loved that I managed to talk to those people who not who are considered by traditional historiography as villains. Those people who wanted to bring back Soviet dictatorship, those people who wanted the brutal repressions, those people who wanted to keep Soviet Union by all means, and they were struggling hard against democracy. And those people are rarely heard. And as we know, they they have prevailed. So I really needed to listen to them and to try to talk to them. And even more, I was watching their transformation because for example, for the first time, I talked to a person named Oleg Baklanov, former chief of Soviet military-industrial complex and member of the of Soviet junta, one of those who started that coup against Gorbachev. Um, the first time I talked to him, he was literally crying. He was so frustrated. He was so disappointed that everything he has done in his life was in vain. But then I I was interviewing him more and more, as some of his colleagues, for example, and I saw that they were revitalized with Putin's foreign policy, with occupation of Crimea, with the Soviet Union becoming great again by was clearly in their eyes. Putin made Soviet Union great again, and
Yeah.
they were becoming happier and happier, and they were explaining that yes, they are happy that the their the meaning of their life is back. At the same time, I was interviewing a lot of, but it's also interesting that some of those people who were struggling for the Soviet Union were also courageous enough to admit that they were wrong. And for example, I was really struck by a person named Viktor Altsnis, who was nicknamed Black Colonel. He was one of the most um, far right nationalist pro Soviet patriots, and was hinted to be the military dictator of Soviet Latvia. And I was amazed when he told me that, I really underestimated Sakharov because it turned out that he was a great person. And most of my former colleagues were intellectually much more mediocre. So yeah, I spent so many years to fight against Sakharov and all of them. And now I feel that I was wrong. So he was still keeping his values, and he was still sorry for collapsed Soviet Union, but somehow he reevaluated certain historical personalities.
It's hard to imagine anyone in this country on either side of the aisle being that magnanimous about someone on the other side. I mean, that's very striking to me. I mean, you wouldn't get that.
I think it happens. I think it happens. I think Ronald Reagan is more or less a heroic figure for most Americans from the right and from the left. I think ardent Democrats will not say that Ronald Reagan or Bush Sr. or even it's probably Dick Cheney is interesting figure because he's still a polarizing figure, and he is an important character from my book because he was Secretary of Defense. He was. And he was very important. He had his own vision, and his vision contradicted the vision of President Bush Sr. Because Bush and his Secretary of State James Baker, they didn't want Soviet Union to collapse because they were thinking that Gorbachev, as a pro-democracy reformist, would be the better choice. It would be easier to have reformed Soviet Union and to have the Soviet Union as some kind of United States of United Soviet States, but democratic, and it would be more reliable partner. But Dick Cheney had quite the opposite point of view. He was probably the only American official who was a strong proponent of the idea of collapse of Soviet Union. He wanted Soviet Union to be disintegrated. He was saying that it's better to have 15 small dictatorships. Okay, let it be. If reforms collapse, it's okay. It's better to have 15 dictatorships than one strong nuclear power. And it's we still can argue who was historically right. From my point of view, definitely I prefer the approach of President Bush and James Baker, because that would have at least we know the outcome of Dick Cheney's scenario. Collapse and disintegration of Soviet Union. That moment led us to President Putin and to the bloody war in Ukraine, and to Putin trying to recreate a much more aggressive empire. And if we compare Brezhnev's Soviet Union and Putin's Russia, definitely Brezhnev was much more pro-Western. He really wanted to make friends with Richard Nixon. The number of political prisoners in Soviet Union, yeah, there were political prisoners. I would say dozens of political prisoners. In Russia today, we have thousands of political prisoners.
Yeah.
Current Russia is openly and happily is threatening the West with its nuclear weapon. And for Soviet leaders, it was clear, 100% clear, that was unimaginable, that any nuclear war would have been a catastrophe, and they needed to make a deal with Americans. They knew that, because that generation remembered the World War II. Unfortunately, that was the old generation that was clinging to power and was not ready to give the floor, to give the way to the new generation. We know it happens in some countries that older political elite is not willing to go away.
Yeah.
But at least they strongly believe that a nuclear conflict would be an apocalypse, unlike Vladimir Putin.
Will anyone in Russia see this book?
I hope so. Unfortunately, I really hope so. And I'm not trying to trick you, because I have a plan, and I know that it can happen. And for example, my previous book, which was called War and Punishment, which was the book about the historical myths about Russia and Ukraine, I knew from the beginning that was impossible. That book violated all possible current Russian laws. And I was sentenced to 8.5 years in absentia, partly because of that book. Because that is my award for my book, and I'm really grateful for that. Sarcasm? No, I'm not.
No.
But I do hope, and I know that it's possible. We are working on that. I expect to be able to write on my social media in a month, or in 2 months, or in 3 months, that finally, yes, I found the way to publish this book, and I found partners and brave people who are ready. I hope that it will happen.
Amazing.
Because I'm trying not to spoil this celebration.
Well, hopefully we'll be having another conversation when that time happens about all of that.
But I'm sure that Russian audience really needs this book, because to my mind it's really worthy. it's not only a book about Russia. It's a book. It's the book about beliefs and the book about democracy. And there was a moment when all of us, we were on the bright side of the earth. It was the moment in the late 80s and early 90s when democracy was prevailing everywhere in the world. It was so fashionable. It was clear that no political leader would afford themselves to be a tyrant. And Soviet party bosses or leaders of Eastern Europe or um, Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, who was very far from Soviet Union and who was pro-American dictator, but still that was a part of the global fashion. Everyone had to be more democratic. Pinochet had to accept the results of referendum and had to step down and had to give way to democracy. The same thing happened in so many countries in Asia and in Africa. So, and that was clear that that's the new way how things are going to be. And somehow, and I really want to remind that was possible, and that is still possible. Actually, for that we need people to believe in democracy and that it works. And we need politicians to be really to take it seriously. But now, unfortunately, we are in the dark sides. In the dark side, we are going through the dark side of the earth. It's a dark age when cynicism has become the most important philosophy and ideology in the world. Russia is 100% cynical country, and Russia is exporting cynicism. And now no one is shy being a dictator for Xi Jinping or Recep Erdogan or Narendra Modi or Viktor Orban. And you can continue this list. We all know that authoritarian methods don't scare politicians right now.
Well, one gets the sense, I mean, and again, I haven't finished your book, is that, there was it's one thing to just say, oh, communism's gone, here we are, we're democratic. But what does that mean? What does that look like? How does it work systemically? And it feels like that, that sort of, it meant, it meant something different to different people and at different times. And that was part of the reason it was sort of chaotic, and that Putin and authoritarianism sort of rose up out of the ashes. I mean, to your point, what you said about Solzhenitsyn, very, I mean, define what he meant by democracy. I mean, it's complicated, right?
There are a lot of different reasons why Russia did not become true democracy. But what's important is that, unfortunately, the true idealists were not persistent, and we're not trying to be the real politicians. And much more cynical people, opportunists, became the leaders of the country. And that's always a problem. That's never-ending problem. Sometimes there is a problem that people with values and people who have the vision and commitment have to be more persistent. They have to stop saying that politics is dirty. They have to stop. Voters have to stop saying that nothing depends on us and we cannot change anything. And so, yeah, it's right time to act. It's never late, and it's never early, because I think that it's important to. Unfortunately, Russian people were too early disillusioned with the idea of democracy. Unfortunately, people who were naming themselves Democrats compromised the word democracy. Unfortunately, former President Yeltsin, um, who was the Communist Party boss and who didn't have um, any political agenda apart from taking power. That was his ultimate goal and probably the only goal. He was, it might be, some people would say that it's unfair for me to criticize Yeltsin because he was better than Putin. And probably he was better than Putin because he tolerated independent media. That was clear that, like, unlike Putin, Yeltsin was fine with people criticizing him. But unfortunately, we owe Yeltsin the collapse of all democratic ideals. And unfortunately, we owe Yeltsin rise of Putin. Putin was handpicked by Yeltsin's family, and unfortunately, people who were surrounding Yeltsin and himself included were not true Democrats, and that's always important, not to remember the difference between democracy and calling yourself a Democrat. Sometimes people who are calling themselves Democrats could be not really democratic if they don't listen to other people's pains or point of view. And that's what happened in Russia.
Were most of your interviews done before you left the country in 2022? I asked that because well, as you point out, Gorbachev died, but Kasparov, I'm assuming you could have interviewed whenever, but the people inside of Russia.
No, I still, as you know, I'm still in touch with some brave people who are ready to talk to me, and there is still a possibility you can talk by Zoom or Google Meets or with other apps which are secure, and it's still possible. I had few interviews after the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. For example, I could have never dreamt of interviewing Alla Pugacheva. You mentioned that name. That's a Soviet superstar, the most popular pop singer in Russia ever. And for me, like, I was a writer and journalist, independent, kind of oppositional, almost enemy of the state in Russia. But still, that the gap between me and the superstar like Alla Pugacheva was terrible. It was unimaginable. And then the war started. Everyone is in exile, and Pugacheva in exile and Mikhail Zygar in exile can meet because we are now on the same level. We have become refugees, and so it's some ironically, but our common mischief helped me to organize and to start talking to some people which were unapproachable before.
Right. And do you ever worry because now, you're 3 years coming up to 4, in the West, and there you are teaching at Princeton, and do you ever worry that Russians, if they do get to read the book, sort of may not understand that there's a distance growing between you and them, just intellectually, just by osmosis, the fact of where you are, or not really? I mean, do you think you had all these beliefs before you left Russia?
I don't believe in growing gap. Definitely, I don't feel everything they feel there, but I don't see that our perspective is really different. And we know that we from the news that we see right now, the most important process that is happening in Russia right now is, probably it's too ambitious to call it Gen Z uprising, but there is a very terrible trial of 18 years old street musician, a singer, and her band, uh, and they were singing in St. Petersburg uh, the rock songs of band musicians, of those rock musicians who left the country and who continue to write music and release their own songs about the war, but against the war, about mm, the Russia we lost.
Right.
Those musicians are banned in Russia, and still their music, their songs are very popular. And as a proof, we see that a girl, um, a, a teenager, was arrested, and she has spent almost a month in prison, and probably the criminal case against her is going to be started. So she's facing up to 8 years in prison, only for singing uh, songs of protests in the
Right.
streets of the city. And there is a huge wave of protests against her trial, a huge wave of support on TikTok, in the social media. And it's
Okay.
clear that for younger generation, there is no gap between the outer Russia and the inner Russia. And I'm sure that there is no gap for um, there. This gap still does not exist. Probably in 10 years, the situation might be different. Um, Clearly, Russians who live, who remain in the country, are very vulnerable when they are blamed, when they are called accomplices and so on. And I always think that it's wrong to blame everyone. I think that it has nothing to do with justice. Um, I believe in personal responsibility and personal guilt, and I think that everyone should be treated according to their own activities, um, or silence. But it should be individual, not collective. So yeah, I think that is a problem. Uh, when this conversation is started between those who have who have left Russia, and those who remained, it's a problem. But this book is not about that. I'm not judging.
Right.
Anyone. I'm trying uh, to recall the most important story for Russia, and I'm trying to make it clear that Soviet collapse was not the result of the foreign conspiracy. That was not the result of CIA planning or anything else. It was the outcome of the will of Russian people. And Russian people,
Yeah.
ordinary Russian people, believed in democracy, and that belief was so strong that it ruined dictatorship. And I think that is a very important that's the most important idea for me. And I think it could be relevant. It is relevant for people who live in Russia right now.
Mm. And for people who live outside of Russia right now.
Yes, yeah,
Um, you know,
I do believe that this is not book only about Russia. This is a
yeah,
book about a superpower, mm, on decline. Let's put
yeah,
it this way.
yes. Many, many interesting takeaways. Well, I mean, and really, I mean, it's and what you say is so interesting. But I think that the thing that's so gripping is just it's about people and their lives and their marriages and once you start, I mean, I started, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not what I thought it would be. at all. There's nothing. It's not didactic. It's a real example of showing. There's the expression "show, don't tell." I mean, this is you show. You don't tell readers what to think. You just tell these stories, and then let us make up our own minds, which is, I think, what great writers should do. Mikhail, just quickly, because it is your book launch day, just bring us up to speed with where events stand in Russia right now. I mean, I didn't know that story about the young singer. That's appalling and very interesting that everyone is sort of protesting on TikTok and elsewhere. But we've got winter coming, right?
Oh, yes, we've got winter coming. The situation in Russia is stable. It's may sound funny, but Putin thinks that he's winning, that he's okay without any negotiations. He doesn't need the peace with Ukraine. He's fine without meeting with Donald Trump in Budapest. Even more, it's a unique moment, as I already mentioned, when for the first time probably in the last 100 years, Russian leader is not interested in any kind of communication with Americans. It has never happened before. Stalin was trying to impress Roosevelt, and he even recreated Russian Orthodox Church during the World War II to impress leaders of American Church who were visiting Soviet Union. Khrushchev was trying to be liked by JFK. Brezhnev really liked Richard Nixon and was flirting with him. So it's amazing that for the first time in many, many years, Putin is not charmed at all. He has come to the conclusion that he doesn't need any compromises, that he doesn't need Donald Trump. Because he in his world, in Putin's worldview, he's so experienced. He's been there forever.
Yeah.
Why compromising? Why trying to make any concession if in 3 years there might be another person in the White House, and in 3 years he will have to start it over and over again? No, he doesn't need it. He can live without it, and because he believes that the sanctions don't work, and they won't work. According to his point of view, it's all meaningless.
But on that cheerful note, best of luck.
I don't think that he's 100% right.
Right.
Because definitely the person who is in power for 25 years is supposed to be out of touch with reality. He is
right.
He's older than General Secretary Chernenko, who was 72 when he died, and he's Putin is 1 year younger than General Secretary Brezhnev. He died when he was 74. Putin is now 73, so that's a very dangerous age for a Soviet leader.
All right, we shall see. We shall see. Mikhail, thank you so much. Really good luck, everyone. Buy the book. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.